Good evening, everybody who's joined us. Welcome, and thank you for coming to this special discussion at the European Film Festival in South Africa, and to this particular discussion, which is brought to you from Johannesburg and Ghent, I believe, in Belgium, and which is a discussion to talk about the wonderful film, Save Sandra, which I hope many of you will have watched. And if you haven't watched, I hope that this discussion will entice you into watching the film and telling lots more people to watch it as well. So that should be the measure of the success of our conversation. My name is Mark Heywood. I'm an activist. I'm the editor of Maverick Citizen, which is a section of the Daily Maverick in South Africa that focuses on human rights and social justice. But I was particularly honored to be asked to host this discussion because it's about an issue that has been very, very close to my heart, as we will discuss, for over 30 years, which is access to healthcare and access to medicines. We're very privileged to be joined by the directors, the stars of tonight's show, Lien, Willaert. Lien, good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for being here. Lien is the screenwriter and co-director of Save Sandra. In Belgium, she's very well known, having worked extensively in television. She may not be very well known to us in South Africa, but I can assure you she has a very impressive catalogue of films behind her. And sitting on her left-hand side is Jan Verheyen. I hope I pronounced that right. Jan is co-director with Lien of Save Sandra, and Jan is one of Belgium's most prolific film directors. Many successful films. Again, many of us may not be familiar with them. We may want to go and explore after this evening's discussion. But Jan, thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having us and for this incredibly flattering introduction. I could get used to this.
It's my job to be flattering, but I think there's good reason. So, we're here to talk about your film, Save Sandra. I have watched the film. I think that it is a wonderful film. The organizers of tonight said this is a film about life, death, and money. I think we should have said that it is a film about life, death, love, and money, because it is very much a film about parents' love for their young daughter and what they do, driven by that love, to try to save her life and to minimize her pain. So it's really, for me, in many ways, the heart of this film is a love story, a personal story, but it draws in global issues. Lien and Jan, I'm going to assume that not everybody who's with us this evening has seen the film, and again, welcome all of you. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A or use the chat, and we will put them directly to Lien and Jan. But I'd like to start by asking you both to talk a little bit about what the film is about. Take us through, the story of the film. Once we've heard a little bit about the story and what it means to you, I want to talk about the making of the film, because it strikes me that this is a complex film, complex for filmmakers in a number of ways. I'll ask you why in a few minutes. And then towards the end, I want us to talk about the issues, the big political issues, if you like, that the film raises. That's a key issue for me, but the story is so important. So that's where we're going to start. Lien or Jan, over to you, whoever would like to kick off.
Jan is better in English, so he will start and I will...
Well, if you will allow me, you're right in the sense that it's a complex film thematically, but we try to make it a very accessible film. It's a film with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and actually in that order. And it's a true story. That's why it was so attractive to us. Personally, both of us, we like true stories. If we make our top 10 list at the end of the year, there's always at least 1 or 2 documentaries and a couple of films that start with based on a true story. And what I especially like about those films is that they prove time and time again that reality is sometimes stranger than fiction. The story of Sandra, who is, you know, the title character, if it didn't happen for real, people would not believe the story. It is so incredible what Sandra and her parents had to go through. Very briefly, because I want to avoid giving too much spoilers. Sandra is a 6-year-old girl who completely out of the blue is diagnosed with MLD, which is a deadly disease. And when they go to the clinic, her parents are told that she has 1 year to live, which is of course a complete shock. This is a normal, happy family, completely unaware of these dark clouds gathering above their heads. And the father refuses to give up. The father is a very stubborn man, but in a positive sense, I think. And he finds out that there's an experimental medicine that is being developed in Denmark. And he obviously tries to contact the company in Denmark.
But it's not licensed yet.
Yes, it's not licensed yet. Yeah. You know that medicines have to go through a number of phases before they are officially recognized. Sometimes that varies from territory to territory. In America, you need to pass very stringent tests by the DEA. I forgot the exact. No, the
FDA.
Yeah. The FDA, okay, exactly, the FDA. In Europe, every country has different rules, so it's quite complicated. But there is a trial going on with MLD patients. So he obviously tries to get his daughter into the trial, even though he's invited, and all the signals are positive. His daughter is refused. And then basically the film is about their struggle to get their hands on the medicine. And there's this ticking clock because the disease is such a cruel disease that one by one her functions shut off. So
and the medicine can stabilize her, not
cure her. So it stabilizes the disease, but it doesn't cure her. So
and delay the progression of the disease as well.
There's a ticking clock.
It's a race against time.
Yeah.
So that's basically the story.
And so it's a story about the 3 key people, the mum, the dad, and the daughter. That's the core of the story. But it's also about their quest, their struggle to raise enough money to be able to pay for this medicine. And like you say, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but the responses of the pharmaceutical company and concerned and the ultimate outcomes of this this struggle. You know, I don't know if you know the British Turkish writer by the name of Elif Shafak. She's a beautiful writer, but she makes the point often that stories allow connection and they allow empathy with real life issues, as you say, issues that seem impossible to believe. And that was what struck me about this, was that, you know, you hear a lot about pharmaceutical companies, big pharma, profiteering, and a lot of it is in very dry political language that washes over people and that doesn't get their hearts, however wrong it may be. It doesn't go to their hearts. Whereas this is a film that really goes to your heart. I can promise people who are with us tonight that it goes deeply to your heart, because the little girl is intelligent, articulate. She's like any one of our 6-year-old children when they were 6 years old, and beautiful and questioning about the world, and you love her in the film. But it must have been complex to make. Lien, I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. I heard earlier on, for example, that you spent a lot of time with the young girl.
Every Wednesday afternoon,
acted the parts. Tell us about that.
Every Wednesday afternoon, I went to her house and we did some crafts. I told her stories. We played a lot, and playing full, I get her into that role. And I think that's very important to do that like that, because she was in the second school.
She was 6 years old, so she was in second grade. She could read, but not very
fluently.
Not fluently.
So
the child who acted it was 6 years old.
Seven.
Yeah. Wow.
So you have to do it like that, and she must trust me, and I had to know her very well, so I knew how to handle her to get some reactions. And sometimes she reacted at something really different from the scene, but it has to be natural.
Because as I said, such a young girl, you can't give just the page and say, learn your lines and be prepared. You have to guide her into it, and that's what Lien spent a lot of time and energy on. Even though it's a serious subject and she plays a sick child, and as the disease progresses, it becomes even a physical exercise. She was playing. I mean, she's a child. She played the part. It was quite amazing. There were scenes in which almost everybody on the set was in tears, and we called cut. And then Rosalie, as she's called, did something like, "Oh, I'm so hungry. When is lunch?" So she was blissfully unaware, in a sense, of the seriousness of what she was playing.
And also we had home videos from the real Sandra, and I looked at it with Rosalie, and I thought it must be heavy for her to see that, but she said, "Oh, she's so lovely, she's so cute." So she saw also the beautiful girl, even if she was very sick. She saw, oh, she's cute.
Yeah, and I must say, again, without spoiling it in any way, but she plays the part so beautifully, and the transition from a girl who's not ill at all, who's an inquisitive, little playful, dreaming child, through the stages of illness, is very real. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel acted in any way. And it's interesting that you know, Lien, that you talk about her being, or Jan, about her being blissfully unaware, because I guess one of the questions in my mind is, for a child that young, playing a part like that could actually be quite traumatic, because you're having to play a part about death and disease and loss.
But we didn't tell her everything.
Right.
We sometimes she didn't knew the context and the whole scene. But now she's 2 years older, and she saw the film, and then she realized, whoa, she realized the story now.
And to add to that, and that was a very emotional moment as well. The film is doing the festival circuit now before it's opening in its home territory next week. And one of the screenings was in Holland at Film by the Sea. and Rosalie was there. She saw the film for the first time, and Olga, the mother, the real mother, was also there, and they had never met because we avoided. We invited Olga and William to the set, and they came to the set a couple of times, which was already difficult for them. And obviously, we invited them on days where Rosalie was not present. I think that would have been too painful, probably, and too confrontational. So they saw each other for the first time, and when they walked out of the theater, the girl started crying, and she said to Olga, "Can I hug you? Can I give you a hug?" And they hugged each other. And Rosalie said, I'm so sad that you had to live through this for real." So for the first time, she made the connection between what she played and this woman that she saw for the first time, that was the mother of the child she played in the film. And that was such a beautiful moment, a moment of realization. But I still stand behind the decision that we didn't give her the full context.
Yeah.
We protected her from the ugliness, so to speak, of what really happened, and we allowed her and we encouraged her to literally play the part.
And I think that's, when I talked about the complexity of making a film like that, that was partly in my mind because, this is a child actor being asked to depict something that's beautiful and terrible at the same time. And how do you navigate that? How do you navigate it ethically and not in an exploitative way? So what you are telling us, I think, is very important and interesting, and thank you for the way you did it, which leads me to my next set of questions. Yeah, and well, we know now it's a true story. Who decided to make the film? What did you and Lien say this is something that needs a film, or was it Olga and William, the parents, who said we need a film made? Where did this start?
Well, for those of you who have seen the film, they will understand what I'm going to say now. Olga and William had become almost reclusive in the sense that they were afraid of the media. They were. It's complicated, but at some point they didn't want to have anything to do with the media. So I had to be very careful in how to approach it. I knew their story. I had followed it in the media, via the media, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. So I decided to approach William via an intermediary, and he agreed to meet with me. And I think there was just enough time between what happened and when we met, so that he was much more open than probably he would have been a year or 2 years before. And it was a 2.5-hour conversation, almost a monologue. He told me the whole story, and I was emotionally wrenched when I came home and I told Lien what William had told me. I had to stop once in a while to recompose myself because I couldn't tell the story without becoming emotional. And basically, when I left the meeting with William, I was convinced this is a story that needs to be told. This is a story that I want to tell. It's not only an important story, but if you, as a filmmaker, you're always looking for stories. I mean, that's what we are. We are storytellers. We're not necessarily auteurs. We're storytellers, and we're always on the lookout for a good story. And if you make abstraction of the human suffering, it's a good story. It's really a good story. So I came home, I told the story, and Lien, at the end, when I finally got through it, she said, "Isn't that more something for me as a director?" And I said, "No, because I found it." And then, there's this expression, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans.
John Lennon said that.
Exactly. And all kinds of other films suddenly happened, and that 2 years went by, and then Lien finally said, "Okay, let me at least write it," because I wanted to write it as well. And Lien took over. Lien took over. We had loads of information. William has documented everything. So we had his diaries, we had videos, we had tapes of the phone calls he did. We had every single document, invoices,
emails,
letters, everything. So Lien really threw herself on it. She took a year to write the story. And at that point, she became so involved and so knowledgeable. We also realized that one of the three leads was a 7-year-old. I'm not very patient with children. It's one of my many defaults.
And also, do you see him every Wednesday afternoon playing with the 7-year-old girl?
Yeah.
So very
female director,
it's difficult. So very organically, we decided to do it together, and I think that was in hindsight, it was it was what the film needed. It was a smart decision, and I am absolutely convinced that it's a better film because we did it with the two of us than if I had done it on my own.
Yeah, I could retire with Sven and Daria,
you could concentrate
on Sven and Daria and Rosalie, the girl. We could get in our bubble when Jan did the whole machine and the crew and all the rest. It was very
because
good.
You know how it works on a set. Once you start filming, there is so much going on that you don't always have the time to like shut everything down and go and sit with the actors, and especially not the girl. And this way we created a comfort zone for Lien and the actors, while I kept the machinery going, and I obviously I did the supporting cast and everything. So it made sense from both an emotional and practical point of view. It made sense to have two directors on board in this particular case.
Well, if I can say, I think that the script, if that's the right word for it, Lien, is beautiful and sensitive. I don't speak Flemish or whatever language, but even with the English subtitles, there were certain points where I felt like I want to stop this and write some of this down, some of the words, because they're very poignant. Particularly some of the things that Sandra says, and with no disrespect to Jan, I think it takes the sensitivity of a woman to fully capture some of those, the depth of those.
There's a little yin and a little yang and a little Lien and a little yang.
The yin and the yang works very well. But let me also say, and we're going to move, because I'm having to not give anything too much away. And if anybody has any questions, please, the Q&A is open, the chat is open. If you've seen the film and you want to say something about it, please feel free to use it. Artistically, it's a beautiful film. Your use of animation in the film was very moving. Let me say, we're going to start to move on to some of the kind of political aspects of this film. But let me congratulate you and ask you to comment on this. I've been, as I said, a human rights activist around health. And in the early 2000s, I was one of the leading people who was fighting for antiretroviral medicines in South Africa, particularly for mothers, to prevent mother-to-child HIV transmission, because many mothers were giving birth to children with HIV, and those children would then have very, very short lives. And I know, a short lifespan doesn't stop a parent from starting to love the child. So it resonated with me in that respect. But what also resonated with me was you showed, because the film becomes about William's campaign to get the medicine, and eventually a campaign against the pharmaceutical company whose name we will mention in a minute. But it depicts that campaigns are not simply, they're not easy, they're not smooth. It shows William and Olga's moments of doubt, the highs and the lows, the times when they are the darling, if you like, they have the sympathy of the public, and the times when the public turns against them. And when you are David fighting a Goliath of pharmaceutical companies, it's not an easy fight at all. And it takes, I mean, we talked about love at the beginning of the film. It takes something deep to keep going with that struggle. So perhaps you'd like to just comment on a little bit on that aspect of the film. I just think the human dimension that you brought to life is so important in this grand drama.
Well, yes, it takes courage and determination and a certain amount of stubbornness, and even, dare I say, tunnel vision, because at the end, and it's very difficult to, because we've met William and Olga, so we got to know them quite well, and inevitably, when you're drawn in such a David versus Goliath type of fight, there becomes you arrive at a point, and I'm being very nuanced about this, I'm trying to be very nuanced about this, you arrive at a point where it becomes almost an obsession, that the cause of the fight is, I'm not saying replaced by the fight itself, but that you end up at a certain point, because Sandra became more and more ill, and there's a character in the film, the mother of William, who asks a number of questions concerning quality of life, and is the Sandra that they're fighting for still the Sandra as you described her, as this curious and articulate and playful and girl. At some point that girl was no longer there, you know what I'm trying to say. And so the film not only raises questions about ethics in the pharmaceutical industry and ethics in the health care system, it also addresses the question of quality of life and how far do you go, and all these elements I've discovered by talking to William and Olga are incredibly personal. What I've learned from their story is that maybe we should not be as hasty in judging people and having an opinion about everything, because certainly in this particular case, it's incredibly personal. We've discussed about it a lot, and it's a discussion that people will have after having seen the film. How far would you go? What would you do if you were William and Olga? At what point you would have decided this is a fight still worth fighting for? And when we asked that question to Olga and William, they said something that I will never forget. They said, because we've seen Sandra, I was almost going to say we've met her, but it wasn't really meeting. We saw her. She was in a hospital bed in the living room of William and Olga, but it was impossible to communicate with her. And then William, or Olga, was it Olga who used that line? Was William, he said, people always, when they look at Sandra, see what she can do. And that's a lot. When we look at Sandra, our daughter, we see what she still can do. And that is for me the line that made me aware of, you can only make that sort of decisions when you are in that situation yourself, and it varies from person to person, and you have to respect that.
Lien, do you want to add anything? Do William and Olga I mean, they've seen the film now, they've seen the finished product.
There is also something, last year, William had a brain tumor and he died. So William and Olga, they've seen the film, the image look, as we say, without the music and without the sound, the definitive sound. It was very, very emotional. After they've seen the film, they hugged us and
we basically cried together for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, it was really, really emotional. And he saw it as a sort of
he saw it as a sort of he was so glad that
honor?
as he restored his honor.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Belgium still, when they remember Sandra Massard, oh yeah, that's the father who raised money for his own profit, and he used this sick. So it's amazing. That is what. And now his heritage is different. His heritage is now what he really was, a very concerned and courageous and stubborn, yes, father who went all the way in the fight to save his child's life. So I think he was in a sense relieved that we took the time to tell the whole story. And when we approached him, we were always truthful. We said, listen, we are not going to make we're not going to make a saint out of you. We want to, through the character of his mother and through the certain characters in the medical industry, we also want to hear sound, rational arguments of people who disagreed with you. Because yes, I know Big Pharma is the obvious bad guy, but even some of the arguments that we allow them to use in the film, there's the head of the company, but there's also a couple of professors discussing on a live TV show. It's not all negative. I mean, without Big Pharma, we wouldn't have certain medicines. Without the money being spent on research and development, we would not have a medicine for AIDS. We would not have a vaccine against corona. The big question is, how do you deal with certain ethical issues? Why did we allow our health to become an industry? We are now referring to the health industry. And of course, these companies, they're companies. Their goal is to make money. But how do you define the amount of money they can make? I remember an interview with the head of a company in England, and it caused quite a scandal, but at least he was honest. He literally said on television, I have no responsibilities towards sick people. My only responsibility is towards my shareholders. And that kind of summarized the problem I think we have with that industry. How do you?
And I think your film shows the human cost of that. And that's one of the reasons why it's so powerful. Sorry to interrupt you, Jan, but yes, because health may be an industry, but health is a public good. And medicines are, certainly in my book, part of a human right of access to healthcare services. So selling medicines is not like selling perfumes or selling expensive cars. There has to be some restraint. There has to be an ethic. There has to be a moderation. And there has to be a keeping of the patient at the center of the picture. We'll come back to that in a minute, but I want you to tell people who are with us. So you don't, I mean, the pharmaceutical companies involved in this case, Olga is real, William is real, Sandra is real, MLD is real. Everybody can place this story. I went online, but you don't name, you call Shire Pharmaceuticals by another name. You don't name Zymanex, the Danish company. Were you worried that they would litigate, that they don't want this story told in this way?
Well, I personally didn't worry about it because, as you know, controversy in this case could only help the film. And since our case was very well documented, it probably would not have been the smartest move to litigate, but you know how that works. They know that litigation costs a lot of money, which they have, and filmmakers do not necessarily have. So so the producer, I think, took the sensible decision to rename the companies, to give them another name, knowing very well, as you just proved, if you go on the internet and you type in William Massart and Sandra Massart, you get the whole story and you know exactly which companies are involved. So it wasn't a fight that we thought was worth fighting. We gave them another name.
Yeah. No. And has there been any, I mean, it hasn't been released yet in Europe, the film. So there won't have been any reaction or any responses from those companies. And I think they eventually took that drug off the market, if my research was correct. Is that right?
Well, they stopped the development after the trial tests. They came with an announcement that in their interpretation, the results of the trial tests were not sufficient for them to continue testing and to produce the medicine. And they handled it very poorly because the parents of the children involved in the trial test, who had a promise that they would get the medicine for free for the rest of their lives, they simply got an email saying, "I'm sorry, we're discontinuing the production. This dose will be the last one."
Exactly.
And we met a girl.
And actually, in the film, you see a scene where Sandra meets in the hospital in Copenhagen another child who is just in time or young enough to participate in the clinical trial. We met the parents of that girl as well, and they told us the story about that they simply got an email that this would be the last dose. And the remarkable thing is that girl is still alive. So we will never know in how far the medicine was indeed helpful in stabilizing the disease, or if that particular girl had, a stronger immune system, whatever. We will never know that. But and we didn't succeed in contacting some of the other patients because they are literally spread all over the world. But they did discontinue the production or the test phase of the medicine. In the meantime, what Lien has looked at up, there are other.
They were developing a similar medicine themselves, but it's still not on the market.
Mm. But I think that's the complexity of what we're dealing with. I mean, you depict in the film another little girl who was benefiting, and you depict, and it's again a poignant moment in the film where Sandra interacts with her, where the parents see her, where they get hope. And the problem is, and you use the term at the beginning of this discussion, orphan drugs, is that the decision to discontinue a drug or research into a medicine isn't only made on whether the medicine works, particularly when you're dealing with medicines that are for rare diseases. The problem is that it is a profit motive. It's a calculation as to how much you can extract from a particular medicine. And that's a broader problem that we have in the world, which is why, in an editorial I wrote yesterday, I made the point that, Sandra stands for literally millions of people who could have access to medicines that prolong their lives, restore their health, restore dignity, restore many, many things, hope and life and love, and are denied them. So let me ask your opinion on this. We'll come back to the film in a minute. I see there's a question. How much power do pharmaceutical companies have, and how can these powerful corporates be held to account when they prioritize profit, massive profit, over the health of citizens? And maybe Jan or Lien, you speak as well. You know, this is it takes us into the terrain of things like COVID vaccines. I mean, you're sitting in a country, part of the world where I think now about 60% of the population, my figures may be wrong, have been vaccinated.
It's actually over 80% now.
Over 80%. I'm sitting in a part of the world where less than 3% have been fully vaccinated. And again, cost and marketing is a factor. So will you just reflect on that question by one of our attendees?
Well, it's quite a complex question, and I thank you for it, but how can you hold them accountable? I don't think you can hold them accountable because they are companies, they are private companies, and as that one CEO said, they are only accountable towards their shareholders and to nobody else. And that's why when you have a free market, I think most of us understand why we have a free market. It's a good system, but in almost every country you have corrections. You correct the free market, you guide it. That's why we have systems in place to have our own culture, that we can make films and make plays in our own culture, that we not only get to see American films, that that we have a health care system which varies incredibly from country to country. Most European countries have at least the advantage that they have a strong healthcare system, but that healthcare system has to deal with the pharmaceutical companies, and that's where I think the problem lies. You see, you mentioned the corona virus and the corona crisis. What did we see happen in Europe? At first, individual governments were negotiating directly with companies. The UK negotiated very quickly an expensive deal with one of the companies to make sure that the first batch of vaccines would be for them. Europe at least had the reflex to sit together and try to negotiate a deal for, I think, every single member nation of the European Union. So they were able to get a better deal than the UK did. But the idea that you have to start negotiating with a company about a medicine that, as you've said, can mean the difference between life and death, it's not exactly an ideal situation. What would be an ideal situation, however, is not a realistic one, because if you don't want to depend on pharmaceutical companies for research and development of new medicines, the consequence is that you have to do it yourself, that either as a government or as a territory or as a European Union or as the US or whatever, that you have to invest in research and development, which is, let's face it, very, very, very expensive. And most territories, most countries, even those who have a good healthcare system, simply do not have the resources to start developing medicine for every single possible disease, let alone those many, many orphan diseases. So in a sense, we're chained to one another. We will need the pharmaceutical companies and their financial power and their financial backing in order to develop the medicine, and we will have to find a balance somehow between the pharmaceutical companies and giving them the opportunity to make money, but on the other end, governments that make sure that there is access to the medicines that are being developed, that are being bought, by the national healthcare systems, but you will never, as one of the CEOs in the film says, every new medicine will always be too late for someone. People will continue to die because the medicine for whatever they have is not yet developed, is not yet on the market. It will always be a race against time. The key question is, A, how do you find the balance between those companies and the greater good? And that's an ethical question. But there is also a second question, and that is a very, very interesting, but an extremely difficult question. How much can a medicine cost? If you have, there's a very good example. If somebody who is 93 years old comes to the hospital and needs a treatment, and there are only a limited number of beds and treatments available, do you help the 93-year-old or do you help a younger person? When you have to choose between somebody who has chain smoked all his life and only ate junk food and therefore has diabetes and all kinds of other diseases, or you need that bed for somebody who has had led a healthy life, but now he has, I don't know which form of disease. So even on a healthcare level, choices will always have to be made. Do you pay one of the most expensive medicines that is now on the market, also for a specific disease, costs 1.9 million euros. I don't know what that is in rand, but it's a hell of a lot of money. When you have to choose, will we help that one patient in our country that has that orphan disease? Will we spend the 1.9 million on her, knowing that for that same amount of money, you can help hundreds, maybe thousands of other people? And those are questions that we will be confronted with more and more in the future.
Absolutely. So, Lien, do you want to add anything before I respond to Jan?
I think he said everything.
Let me say this, because people probably are now getting irritated because I talk all the time, but Lien is at least as knowledgeable about these things as I am, but she feels very uncomfortable speaking in English. So
okay,
in order to
I gathered that, but would you like to have a go, Lien? Is there anything you want to just add shortly to what Jan said?
No,
not at the moment.
We're very complete.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, what you've just said, Jan, is one of the reasons why I wish this film is seen very, very widely around the world. As I've said, as a work of art, of filmmaking, it is very powerful and beautiful and touching. But it's also a film that I hope will provoke debate and will provoke informed debate, because the world that we're going into is a world where there is going to be much more disease because of the climate crisis, because of non-communicable diseases, etc. And I think it's very important that ordinary people acquaint themselves with this behemoth called the pharmaceutical industry, the health industry, so that they can understand when they're being told truths and when they're being told lies. So, if you and I had a few more hours, I would argue with you over a beer this evening and a wine, because some of the things that you've said are debatable. You take, for example, the investment into medicines. Take COVID medicines.
It's only 15% of their
of their profit, of their annual profit.
Exactly. So Lien, the point is that the pharmaceutical companies, one of their stock arguments is we have to spend billions and billions and billions on research and development. And we have to recoup that money. That's not true.
And sometimes it's already developed by universities,
Exactly.
paid by governments, and then paid to the pharmaceutical pharmacy, and then yeah.
Exactly. I mean, if you take COVID vaccines, for example, you know, COVID vaccines, the science, the basic science has been going on for a decade in universities. Governments invested $100 billion in COVID vaccines. And yet the profiteering that is taking place for them is just, it's fundamentally immoral. So in answer to that, or just to add to that, the question that we received, you know, these are debates that we have to have. These are issues that we have to say to our governments, you need to do more. Jan said we're chained to each other. Yes, we are. There's no doubt that pharmaceutical companies have an important public and private role. But in another interview that I saw with you, Jan, you said something like, we've allowed it to come too far. The balance is wrong. And we've got to get that balance right. It's a big question, and we could debate it all night. But it leads me to another question. I mean, do you hope that your film will have a political impact in any way, or is this just a story?
No, I think it's more. No. I mean, it's more than a story. It's not because I'm a storyteller that I don't care about which stories that we tell. It's an important. I agree with you. It sounds very pretentious to call it an important story, but yes, it is an important story. But it's a small film from a small country. That means that it will not have worldwide distribution. But I'm sure that the people who see it, or I'm almost sure that the people who see it, will definitely have something to talk about. And the more people that become aware of this, and this is, and it gives all, as you've said in the beginning, it gives those orphan diseases. Now suddenly you have a face. You see what it does to a normal family that could be yours. I mean, it sounds like a tagline from a 50s science fiction movie, but it could happen to you. It could happen to you. I mean, it's something that is completely random. It's completely random. It's fate. Call it what you want. So yes, I hope it provokes debate. It hopes there are a number of politicians who've seen the film and they will try to get a screening in the European Parliament and all of that. So it will definitely help to keep the debate that is already going on. By the way, it will help to keep that debate awake. But it's not a film that's gonna. I mean, there are very few films that have changed anything, but there are a lot of films that have at least made people aware of certain issues. So if we succeed on that level, I think we would be quite pleased already.
Lien, anything to add on that?
No, I would say about the European Parliament, but you mentioned.
Yeah.
You know what I think? I mean, I hope I'm not a specialist in films. I'm not an art critic. But I found it a well-made film and a moving film. And you know, there are films that change the world. You know, in the early days of AIDS, films like Philadelphia were made that very well captured the crisis of AIDS in the United States in the 1980s. You know, we have films like And the Band Played On, which is also about the pharmaceutical companies in relation to HIV. And I see this as, you know, in the same genre, except that I think that the intensity of your focus on the family is very touching and very moving. Yeah, maybe if it gets nominated for an Oscar, then more people in the world can find out about it. But we're coming to the last few minutes that we have. So perhaps I should just sort of end by ask you to talk really about what this film means to you. I mean, both of you have been filmmakers for quite a long time. You've got a body of work Is there something special about this film? Will you look back on it as a special film? And if so, what? We only have 4 minutes left. So I'm perhaps asking a big question late in the day, but perhaps we can end on that.
I learned that you can't take happiness for granted. And those were normal people with a happy life, and suddenly everything changed. And so be happy while you're healthy, and take your kids and give them a hug. That's important, I think.
And this time I have nothing to add to that.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say at all, Jan or Lien, as our parting shots to people who've been with us tonight and people who will watch this interview in days ahead?
No, I mean, thank you for having us. It's as you said, film is an international language, and the fact that we are now talking to you, we again, you in Johannesburg, and that our film at least is available to be seen for those who want it, makes us happy. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Lien. Thank you, Jan. Thank you for making what I think is a strong film. I'll remember it and I'll recommend it, and I would recommend that anybody listening to this or watching this goes as well. I've enjoyed our conversation this evening. It's touched on deep matters of life and death and love, and what we need to do to keep life alive and love alive and families. So thank you to you. Thank you to the European Film Festival. And I know you're busy recording for another film in Ghent and you have to leave at exactly 7 o'clock. So I'm going to excuse you 1 minute early and switch off our cameras. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Good
good
night,
night.
everybody.